All right, guys, welcome back to Key Knowledge 7 of this final outcome. And we're looking here at something called Lewin's three-step change model. Okay, so here is our study design. And here is what we're talking about, the key principles of the three-step change model, Lewin. Now, I guess first thing to point out is that name Lewin we've seen before. Remember the force field analysis with the driving and the restraining forces and all that sort of stuff. So we now have two Lewin theories in the course. Of course, do not confuse the two when you are referring to these theories. Keep them separate. Don't start, if you're going to talk about three-step change model, don't start talking about driving and restraining forces. And if you're talking about the force field analysis that he came up with, don't talk about unfreezing, changing and refreezing, which is kind of where we're going with this one. I guess the other thing to point out is that you see a couple of bullet points ahead. We've already talked about the principles of the learning organization. So this is the second of the two theories. I said when we did that video that this outcome includes two theories that allow managers to kind of take the business through change. So sort of steps that managers can go through. So this is the second of those two theories. Okay, the three-step change model by Lewin. Okay, so this is fairly simple. He said basically there's three steps or three stages that managers must take the employees through if the change is to happen successfully. First off, unfreezing the status quo. Second step or the second stage would be changing from the current situation to the new situation. And then the third step is refreezing the new situation. So as soon as you think Lewin's three-step change model, you're just going to think unfreezing, changing, refreezing. And look, because that language is kind of unusual, this is normally fairly easy to remember, I think. So first off, unfreezing, step or stage one. This is the stage where managers need to prepare the business and prepare the employees that change, to accept that change is necessary. If they don't believe that, then you're never ever going to get the change that you need. Okay, employees need to believe in this change for it to happen. So in this step, you move the business to a state where the stakeholders are prepared to undergo the change. Fairly simple so far. Look, another part of this might involve helping employees to kind of unlearn what they already know, or kind of break their current behaviors and habits and way of doing things before we even think about learning new behaviors and ways of doing things. Okay, so unlearning what we already know so that we're ready to learn the new way. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. Look, just to give you another example, I think that just kind of occurred to me just then. When I did my degree, my first degree many years ago, I did a degree in accounting, and most of the people on my course then wanted to go on being accountants. So look, to get into one of the big accounting firms, you needed a decent degree, but they often preferred to take graduates who did not have an accounting degree, had like some other degree. All they wanted was a quality degree, could be in any subject, but they often preferred if it wasn't accounting, because kind of the theory was that if people came from the universities with accounting degrees, you kind of learned ways to do things. That might not be how that firm did things, and they'd need to then kind of like almost unteach you how you're used to doing things and then reteach you their way, whereas their take on it was easier if you came with like almost like a blank canvas, so that you just learned right from up front how they kind of did processes. So it's a bit like that, just to help you explain what I'm talking about there, this unlearning things. Okay, so managers need to identify why the change is necessary. Look, that's probably already happened. And what needs to be changed. Okay, highlight the reasons and the benefits of the change to all the relevant stakeholders, and then communicate that. Now, again, generally we're talking about employees here, okay, but there might be other stakeholders involved here. But the focus generally for this stuff is on the employees. The managers need to demonstrate the importance of change to the stakeholders. That's therefore going to increase the support for the change and create this sense of urgency that we need to get the change done. This stage also provides, or should provide, an opportunity for stakeholders to raise any concerns related to the change so that the change can be adapted, tweaked if necessary. And the theory goes that if stakeholders are ready to accept the change, the business can then proceed with the actual change and move on to step 2. There's no point in trying to do step 2, like actually make the change, unless you've gone through this process and everybody's kind of ready to accept and knows why the change needs to happen and they're ready for it. Okay, so that's kind of the importance of this unfreezing part. So then we move on to step 2. So this is where the actual change is going to happen. Okay, this is where the managers take the business through towards, the desired state, the desired change. So this is where the managers are looking for new ways of doing things, beginning to implement the necessary changes, moving from one state to another. For example, moving from a state of making massive losses to hopefully a state of making a profit, for example, as a most sort of basic example. Important to involve the employees in the process as fully as possible, so they've always got an understanding of how the changes are going to benefit them, as well as what will now be required of them and any new procedures that they will have to learn. If you think about this stuff as well, think back to the very last key knowledge dot points 5 and 6, where we're looking at high and low risk strategies. There's definitely kind of crossover here. A lot of the stuff I'm saying here really closely links into those low risk strategies, making sure that everybody understands, providing support, all this sort of stuff. So managers need to help employees to change their behaviours through support. There we go, back to a low risk strategy. Support and training, because we know already, as we've said many times, that people very often, by their very nature, are averse to change and find it uncomfortable. So depending on the change that needs to happen, this change might involve implementing redundancies, organising redundancy packages. If that is the case, this process is therefore going to be even more stressful. And then this low risk strategy of support becomes even more crucial. Okay. Now, I've put a red note there, usually most scope to draw from case material here. When you're answering questions on this process and applying it to a case, look, generally speaking, the first step and the third step, your responses tend to be fairly generic, and there's often not a huge amount to draw from on the case. Like, your answer tends to be kind of what I've talked about here. But the actual changing, the second step, this is normally where there's more scope to actually draw from the case, because of course, the first step and the third step you'll see in a minute, it's kind of the same every time. But the actual change process, this is what's going to be different in each case that you see, because the change that's being made within the case material that you're seeing is going to be different. So usually when, we talk about, when it says relating to the case material, relating to the particular business, usually it's in this second step that you have the most scope to actually draw from case material, just kind of pointing that out. And then we move on to the third step, refreezing. So this is where managers put in place strategies that make sure that the new behaviors are stabilized and reinforced in the business. So they kind of become embedded in the culture of the business and then just becomes the norm. Okay. So you want to get to a stage where, at first things are all new, but over a period of time, the new way becomes the normal way. So you almost kind of forget how you used to do things. Okay. So from the employees and other stakeholders' point of view, we have a new normal here. That's the idea. And if you get that done, that'll make sure that the change is sustained within the business in the long term. Okay. So we're looking to change from the old to the new and make sure that the new just becomes embedded in people's minds and in the way they do things. So now the change has occurred, it's essential we embed it in the culture and the practices, all of that. So that might include updating some policies and procedures within the business to make sure that the change is ingrained within the day-to-day operations and just how people do things, and that staff don't then revert back to how they did things previously, because then obviously you're undoing the change. Okay, so fairly simple, I think. So just giving you an example here of this theory kind of in action. So we're going to use target here. So in 2021, Target Australia closed down tons of stores, okay? And some other stores were converted into Kmart stores because the parent company of both, Wesfarmers, were working to shore up its retail division. Okay, they're looking at the retail division overall and going, look, how can we strengthen this? Now, news of the downsizing of the Target brand first broke in middle of 2020. It was announced that the profitability of the once favoured department stores, in other words, Popular, was falling. Okay, so profits in Target were nosediving somewhat. So the change was that they closed down roughly 75-ish Target stores forever, including 25 standard Target stores and 50 Target country stores, which are the smaller versions of Target that you tend to find out in country towns, regional towns, coastal towns, that sort of thing. So that was the change that needed to happen. So why did they close the stores? Look, the Wesfarmers analysed the business. There was a bit of a change in the retail landscape in the way that people were shopping, and they noticed that consumers were opting more for cheap and cheerful products from retailers like Kmart, and then the high end was doing well. Now, despite great brand recognition from Target, what they kind of found that as a kind of large format retail offering, superstores, it was kind of cannibalizing sales from sister group business Kmart. Okay, so in other words, it was like stealing sales from Kmart. That's what we mean by cannibalizing. See, it's like when one business takes sales from another business, but that other business is owned by the same people. But it didn't offer enough of a point of a difference to the higher end stuff like Myer and David Jones. So it's kind of falling down the middle. So I've got in the red there. Think back to Porter's two strategies, the low being the low cost producer or the differentiation strategy. So really what was happening here is that Target was kind of falling down the middle. It was kind of neither one nor the other, which is what Porter's theory said. He said, you businesses need to choose one avenue of those two to pursue. And look, while I think when I did the video for Porter, I said, look, there are a few businesses you could say, look, kind of do both quite well. It is really, really hard to do. And that was what was happening with Target. It just wasn't one or the other, and being in the middle just kind of wasn't working for them. Okay, so Porter said that was not a good approach, and for Target, it ended up kind of being the case. So unfreezing. So Target needed to prepare its stakeholders for the closure of these 75 stores. So during this step, senior management would have communicated to all of their stakeholders that the closure of the 75 stores is going to build a more profitable store network and potentially save jobs in the long run. And that's the key here. I guess the message was, look, if we don't do this, then Target might disappear completely. So the impact is going to be even bigger. Okay, so that was a really, really key message to get across. If we don't close these 75, we might end up in a position where we have to close the whole business down. Okay, so that was a key part of getting acceptance for the change. If the changes are not made, the business may not have survived, which would have cost many more jobs. So by highlighting the reasons for the change, Target senior management could encourage the stakeholders to accept the transformation, and this would bring Target to a state where there is enough momentum to actually make the changes. So at the change step, Target would have proceeded with the closure of the stores. That would involve them terminating lease contracts on certain premises, redeploying employees, equipment, inventory, all of that sort of stuff around the place. And to combat the employee fear or stress during the redeployment, Target would have needed to provide appropriate support and training to the employees, which then would allow the employees to transition to the new practices smoothly as they became aware of how they needed to perform in their newly created roles. Okay. And then refreezing, Target would have solidified the closure of the 75 stores. They might have introduced some new policies, new job descriptions, perhaps related to where employees were redeployed to. And to ensure the change had been implemented as well as possible, they would then seek feedback from redeployed staff to assess their satisfaction with the changes and ensure that the new culture that they're trying to create was being reinforced across the business. Okay, that refreeze step then would have assisted Target with sustaining this change in the long run. So hopefully there you can kind of just see, if you weren't sure how this kind of would play out, that there's a practical example of how that would have played out in a business that you are all familiar with. And that's all you need to know for this one, guys. So, and again, a fairly brief one, but again, make sure you understand those 3 steps and the importance that, each step is taken in turn. Because if you miss out a step, the ones coming after are not going to work. But anyway, that's it. I'll leave you for that one, guys, and I'll see you in the next video for Key Knowledge 8. Cheers for now.